Good evening and welcome to the Cancer Education Series brought to you by Mercy One and Above and Beyond Cancer. My name is Chris Goodale and I'm the Executive Director of Above and Beyond Cancer. And it is my weekly pleasure to introduce our founder, Dr. Richard Deming, who will introduce our speaker for this evening. Dr. Deming?
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. It's a real treat for me and for you guys today, this evening. Our guest speaker is Rachel Mindrup, and Rachel is the Richard Deming Chair of Medical Humanities at Creighton University. And it's really an honor for me to say that. Rachel and I spent a day together last month with the inauguration and installation of the Dr. Richard Deming Chair of Medical Humanities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Rachel grew up in Omaha. She went to the University of Nebraska-Kearney for her undergrad, and then she got her Master's in Fine Arts, MFA, at the Art Institute of Boston. So she's a visual artist, a painter, and a professor at Creighton University. In the last couple of years, Creighton Medical School, where I went to medical school, totally changed their curriculum. And it's an understanding that being a medical doctor is a doctor taking care of another human being. It's really a human being taking care of a human being, and that the humanities plays an integral role to being a good doctor. So Creighton University's curriculum for medical school now brings the humanities into medical school. And Professor Mindrup, Rachel, and other professors in humanities that teach in the undergraduate part of the university are also now teaching the medical students and bringing humanities into medical school. Rachel's talk tonight is called Painting Beyond the Diagnosis, How I Use the Visual Arts to Initiate Conversation. And we've talked about the role of narrative medicine, how getting to know patients is about learning what they're all about. And one of the ways of initiating this conversation that's deeper than just, what's your diagnosis, is the visual arts. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel. She's going to give us a bit of a talk, and then we get to have a conversation after a presentation. Rachel, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks Mercy One and Above and Beyond Cancer, and of course to you, Dr. Deming, for inviting me to do this tonight. So I will attempt to share my screen. That's the first thing, and hopefully,
voila, perfect.
Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay. So as mentioned, I use the visual arts, of course, to start these conversations and that sort of thing. But before I get into all of this, I think I should explain to everyone that kind of the genesis of how I got involved in this. So it wasn't like I went to art school thinking I wanted to find different medical conditions to research or something. So I'm going to tell a little bit about my background and kind of what I have been doing. And then as Dr. Deming mentioned, I do teach the med students at Creighton, and I teach a drawing class with them. So I want to then kind of share some of the drawings and some of the stuff that we've done together at Creighton with our School of Medicine. So I will, I'll begin. All right. So first things first, just to give you some background, my oldest son was diagnosed with neurofibromatosis type 1 when he was 4 months old. I went ahead and put in this picture of him because it's really cute. And that's an obvious mom kind of thing. But at the time, I had never heard of neurofibromatosis. When the geneticist told us about it, he told us not to go home and Google it. This was back in the day before we had, before we were walking around with like little computers in our phones. So you had to go back and actually log in and do that stuff. But he said, don't do that. And if you don't know what neurofibromatosis is, or if you're like me and you've never heard of it, and, it's basically a progressive unpredictable genetic disorder. And currently there's no cure. Now there's several different foundations working toward finding treatments and eventually a cure, but back then and still now there wasn't anything. So like I said, at 4 months old, we were given that diagnosis. And I should mention that the geneticist said not to Google it. And he was right, but I did Google it. And of course, as a mother, I freaked myself out looking at all these terrible things that might happen. But on the upside, I'm just sharing this slide now so you can see some pictures of my son throughout the years. So he's doing great. He'll be a senior in high school, but he does have a lot of, kind of the outward tumors. He's got 5 brain tumors, and he's got just some issues, like some cognitive things. He's got balance and coordination issues and stuff, but he is doing great. I always say we hang out and spend a lot of time in kind of hospitals and clinical settings. And so when we do this, of course, I am always sketching. So in these pictures that I put on there of Henry throughout the years, the bottom one is actually him in one of the waiting rooms waiting for his vision test. But anyway, like I said, throughout the years when I, with Henry and with his diagnosis, I didn't know how to sort of process all of this. And it occurred to me that really, the more you connect with others who have a similar or the same diagnosis, I can learn from them and get to know them and maybe see how what their life is like with NF. And so I started doing that. And for me, I started painting portraits. So we all have something that we, a gift or something that we're interested that we can bring to something. So for me, I just started painting portraits of people with NF to learn about their story and then start sharing their story with others. And so in the beginning, I started doing these watercolors, like what you see on the screen here. And it was nice. So really, either parents of kids with NF or people with NF, I would paint these watercolors and then they would donate to an NF charity, of their choice. And so I always figured we all win. So Henry, my son benefits with these watercolor portraits. Obviously the people themselves are benefiting if they have NF and they donate. So it was just a good way to, give back, raise awareness, all that, kind of all of that kind of stuff. And then the project kind of just sort of organically morphed a little bit. And at one point, it sort of turned into a thing. So like when I started painting the portraits, I really didn't set out to just start painting portraits of everybody with NF. I started off with, you can kind of see this really tiny picture from the website on Facebook here, but I started off with just painting one, watercolor portrait of a man named Reggie Bibbs, who has NF, and he was raising a lot of awareness. So I painted his as, at that time, as a thank you, because I wasn't really doing anything. So I thought, well, here's somebody who's doing a lot of awareness. And because he's doing that, again, Henry benefits. And so why not paint his portrait? So it kind of started that way. I always feel like I need to clarify that I didn't just start running around painting everyone's portrait. But Reggie told his friend Maurice, and then one thing led to another. And then I had a mom who asked me, rather than all these profile pictures on Facebook, like 10 years ago or whatever, she's like, it might be nice if you put them, like on a one page. So we can see them all on one page, which seems so obvious now. But at the time I was like, oh yeah, it's like I should put them on the same page. So I did. So I have this Facebook page, just many faces of NF. And then you can see over on the side here that I've done over 200 watercolors. And I've actually done over 100 oil paintings. And then and then if you're wondering about like, what's that number down here, the $50,000 raised and stuff, just again, it's been over 10 years, but just incrementally, all of this stuff really does add up when people donate. So it's kind of nice because you don't, for me, it's kind of like it was a way to kind of fundraise behind the scenes, where these families were donating, and that kind of stuff. So this is the page, like I said. And then as far as oil paintings, so I just shared the watercolors. The oil paintings look more like this. So you can see that these are kind of different than the watercolors, but I really wanted to sort of solidify the people and their personalities in oil paint. I don't have anything against watercolor. I love watercolor, but oil paint is a much more archival, media to use. It's the same reason people's portraits are always done in oil, because we know that 400 years from now, 500 years from now, the oil painting will still be there. So it's just a really good medium to use if you want to kind of preserve legacy. And at the time, I thought, well, why don't I choose who to paint? So why not paint these interesting and amazing people who have NF and solidify their legacy in oil paint, and then let them share their stories. So unlike the watercolors, where I was just kind of doing those for donations, the oil paintings, I had everybody write his or her own biography to go with the painting. And I prefer them to write it. That way he or she can decide what they want to share, what they don't want to share, and that sort of thing. So what I have found very interesting over the years is what people want to share in their biographies, but also what they don't want to share. So it's interesting to me on things that people purposefully leave out. And so that, for me, I guess that's a lot of times the interesting component of it. It's like, it's like there's a certain person I'm thinking of that, he had to have his leg amputated, but he didn't want that anywhere in the painting. He didn't want it anywhere in the bio. And the leg was amputated due to some NF issues, but that's just not what he wanted in there. So it's not. And then, so I thought I'd share a few specific people when it came to some of these NF portraits. And I thought, why not share a few folks from around town here? So a couple of people actually living in Des Moines. So I ended up a couple of years ago painting a man named Brian, who lived in Des Moines. And a friend of mine was working at the Des Moines Register at the time. And Brian was one of his followers, I guess on, I don't know, all my social media, but maybe Twitter and Facebook and stuff. But so Brian was following my friend, Daniel Finney. And so he and Daniel had kind of struck up a friendship and that kind of stuff. And then when he told Daniel that he happened to have NF, as well as, just some other health issues, Dan called me and said, hey, I don't know if you're busy or if you can even do it or anything. He goes, but, I basically have met this guy, through my work. And he just, I think it'd really be a really good, uplifting thing for him. If you could work with him and maybe paint his portrait, get to know him. And I said, sure. I said, I would love to. And so we did. And like I said, this was probably 4 years ago now. And so Brian shared his story. So this is just kind of a clip from the paper. Brian shared his story, and I'll just share just a little bit of it. But he's a little bit heavier, and then he's got tumors actually on his hands too. There's like one on his pinky. But the story that stood out to me was when he said that he was going through drive-through, like a drive-through fast food, and went to hand the cashier his money for the food, and she took the money. She didn't look at him. She just kind of took the money and processed it. And then when she was trying to give his change back, she turned and looked at him and, to hand him the coins and stuff, and then saw the tumor on his hands and pinky and stuff, and kind of freaked out and threw all the change at him and shut the window. And I thought, oh my gosh, so he said, just when people react that way to him, he said, as the quote there says, he said he felt like people thought he was a monster because of the way he looked. So so we got some photos taken, and so then that, like I said, that's the photo and the story, and then you can see my painting over here on the side. And like I said, I always ask everybody what they want to be doing. And so for him, he wanted to be reading this mystery novel, which I also enjoy mystery novels. So we're in good company. And then I put his story that he wrote there on the side. That's a lot of reading. So if you do want to read it more, it's all on my website. So so you can always go there if I'm clicking too fast. The other portrait I thought folks might be interested in is Kathy. Kathy was also from Des Moines and one of Dr. Deming's patients, so he can talk a little bit more about that. But Dr. Deming and I connected on this, and so it's actually Dr. Deming's photograph that I used as the basis of Kathy's painting. So so that's kind of a fun full circle type of thing. And again, all of this stuff's on my website. So if I either click too fast, you can always find it there as well. But anyway, that's just two of the examples of people living with NF in the Des Moines area. And then I'm kind of flipping, switching gears here. As I mentioned before, I've been teaching the med students at Creighton for a couple of years now. In addition, I teach painting and drawing and all that good fun stuff at Creighton. But recently I've been able and very lucky to get to work with these first and second year med students. And that's part of the curriculum, are these sort of humanities kind of selectives that the students take, and they get to pick. So there's a whole list of really interesting ones for them to choose from. My particular one is called The Art of Examination, How Observation Leads to Empathy. And we do a whole lot of different, we do a whole lot of different exercises and things in there. The one on here, you'll see one of the med students is standing up on a model stand posing, and you can see all the other med students are drawing them. So I did. I do think it's kind of fun to have the med students, at least at some point, take that role of model and get up there and model for us all, if only just to have that experience of having people stare at you, just like when you're a patient and the doctor comes in and does an examination, and they're very staring at you and assessing and analyzing and all the same things that we do with drawing. And I would ask the students to write reflections. So they all had to write reflections on that one. Like, how did you feel? What was it like to know that everybody's staring at you? Did you get self-conscious? Did you not? Now, what would you think if you were just wearing the little flimsy gowns that you wear at the hospital? All sorts of stuff like that. So the med students, a lot of the reflections come back where they were like, oh, I was so, mortified when you said we'd have to model. And then they would talk about what they were thinking, like when they were up there. So if anything, it just gets them ready to know what their patient is going to be thinking when they walk into that examination room. Now that they've been drawn and modeled for us all. And then one of the kind of projects I did, this was not this past year, but the year before, when before COVID, when we could have visitors and guests, is I had a young man. His name is Cody. He has Fragile X syndrome, but I had him and his mother come in. And I just told the students, so before class, I just said, I'm going to have a young man who's got Fragile X syndrome. And, we're going to get to know him and we're going to draw him. And I said, how many in here have heard of Fragile X? And a couple hands went up. And I said, well, it's okay if you haven't heard of Fragile X, because I don't know if it's very common. I said, I hadn't heard of it. So they all get out their phones and look up Fragile X syndrome, kind of see what to expect here. And then when Cody came in, uh, you know, he's not presenting in the same ways, you know, that they were all just looking up on their phone. So, you know, they looked this up on their phone expecting one set of appearances and circumstances, and then Cody presents in different ways. And so I asked them, I said, well, you know, what do you think about that? You know, I said, you were all geared up for one thing. I said, so are you going to just always believe, you know, everything on the patient chart and just sort of take that like that? I said, are you going to trust your eyes? And, you know, when things present differently, are you going to, you know, be thoughtful enough to be like, I read this, but I'm seeing this, you know, how do I sort of grapple with that? And so anyway, so these were some of the finished drawings. While we were drawing, Cody was sharing, just sharing important things about his life. You know, the one on the list are all the medications he has to take. So that student, you know, sort of illustrated just the, you know, cascade of pills raining down on him. This student in the middle focused more on Cody's personality and how much he loves mac and cheese, how much he was the kind of helped out with his high school basketball team, kind of like a student manager kind of role. So, so that student, you know, kind of did that around it. So, but again, we draw from life. So the drawings of Cody were done from life. And then, like I said, the students kind of chose what narratives they wanted to kind of finish the, you know, finish the images with. Then this past year, I decided to try my hand at printmaking with the students. So many of them have never done printmaking, and it's just a lot of fun and to be able to use the press. And I told them, if when you do printmaking, unlike drawing or painting or some of these other things where you know, you can go in and fix and fudge things around and stuff. Printmaking, once you print, it's like, well, that's it. And I said, so I said, you know, there's that kind of like nervousness, like, how is it going to turn out? Is it not going to turn out? So I had the students do self portraits. And first they did it in pencil where they could, you know, erase and do whatever and kind of fix. But then I said, okay, now you have to pick just the marks that, you know, you just have to cut into the styrofoam and just pick only the defining marks. So you can't do all the shading and stuff like you're used to with pencil. So you have to be very selective on what you do and how you do it and how you want to convey yourself with minimal lines. And can you do it? So this is one student here in the press, and this is another student's relief print self-portrait. So anyway, and like I said, these are just these are just done with styrofoam, nothing extravagant, but it was fun to see like how they decided to tackle this, and then what they thought of staring at themselves doing self-portraits the whole time. So so that was one of the exercises. And then this past spring, and with Dr. Deming's generosity, we were able to bring in an artist who's from Massachusetts. She also is going through the Art Institute of Boston, Lesley University College of Art and Design, and wrapping up her MFA there. So she, I don't know if it's been 3 years ago now, but was diagnosed with lymphoma. And, you know, of course, with such a devastating diagnosis, you know, she's grappling with that changing identity and she's losing her hair. And so she talks in her artist talk, she talks about how initially so many of her well-intentioned friends and family would come over with casseroles. And she said at some point her freezer was full of casseroles, and with the chemo, she felt queasy anyway. And she thought, how do I get all these loving friends and family who want to help? You know, we never know how to help, but we want to help. What could I do to, you know, have them be part of this journey with me? And she decided to have everyone make hair. So as you can see, fun, whimsical hair, not making wigs or anything. So people are making hair with whatever they have around the house. And then they give her the hair and then she fashions it in a certain way. And because she's an artist and a photographer, She kind of looks at whatever hair that you made and, kind of makes her own persona with it, and then, takes the photos of her and then shares these new kind of fun and quirky identities. So her name's Eileen Powers. And so you can see here's her, um, in these different pieces that people have created for her. And then we had the exhibition in the lead art gallery. So here are the med students are just taking in the exhibition. You can see the photographs on the wall. She sent the some of the styrofoam heads with the actual hair on them. So she sent those. And then after we got done looking at those, we went back and we made hair for Eileen. So this is one of our med students who brought back all these nuts and screws and bolts and stuff from I think her dad's garage or something, and sort of hot glued them and all this kind of stuff. So you can see Simran's making it over there, and there's the final kind of creation there. Then I also included just part of the reflections. So when we did this, Eileen was able to Zoom with us. So as the students are making the hair, I've got the laptop and Eileen's, speaking with them and sharing what it's like to actually be a cancer patient. And so some of the discussions were just really engaging and rich. And Simran here kind of focused on, when she was writing her reflection about the event, kind of focused on some of the language we use. Eileen was telling us how, she wasn't really sure about those references to battle and battling. Sometimes I know in the NF world, we always say we're battling NF, or we use those analogies all the time. And I'm sure same with cancer people say battle, or this sort of stuff, which I think is fine for some people. But for Eileen, she was saying Eileen doesn't care for that, because she said she just didn't feel like a warrior. She said she felt sick. She just felt like other people were calling her that, but she didn't feel that way. And so if anything, it was just an interesting, conversation for us all to have, and that different people, even if it's cancer, if it's NF or whatever it is, can just have different ways they deal with it, and different ways they, would feel about the language that surrounds it. So that was some of the stuff that we did there. Here's more students making hair. These are some more fun ones. I don't even know where that pink Christmas tree thing came from, but that came from the Creighton still life room or something. I don't even know how we have the things we have sometimes, but it's now hair. And then this last image is one of our, so it wasn't just med students. We also had our undergraduate students do it. So life drawing, that kind of stuff. So this is one of our BFA candidates who brought in, all of those plastic bags from, the grocery store and places like that, and all the googly eyes, which I thought it was pretty funny on Russ when he brought this. So this is Russ with his really ridiculous googly eye plastic bag hair. And then we are now shipping all of this stuff to Eileen for her to make her persona. So you can see this is Eileen with her interpretation of the big googly eyed trash bag hair. So I happen to love her photo, and I happen to love what Russ created. I might also just like googly eyes, so I don't know, but like I said, that was just last semester, an example of what we did there. Starting in the fall, I'm going to I have some time set aside in January and February, so I'll be having an actual exhibition of some of the artwork that my med students have done. So I'm kind of excited that I've done this for a couple of years with them, and that I have a venue that I'll be able to kind of showcase some of the interesting things that we've been doing through medical humanities. And I am going to stop. Oh, that's my last slide. I am going to make sure I thank everyone again for letting me come and share all this. I did think before I stopped sharing my screen, I just want to point out those are paintings of Henry on this slide. So I painted him when he was, I think he's about 7 or no, he's 10, excuse me. So I painted him when he was about 10. And then obviously he's a teenager now. So I felt like when people saw the painting of Henry that I had done so long ago, they were like, oh, is that your son? And they, it's one of those things where it's like, well, I didn't want everyone to think I just had a 10-year-old. So I updated the painting. He wants to be a meteorologist. So in the first painting, he's got a little pocket weather alert. It looks like a walkie-talkie, but it's a little pocket weather alert thing, because that's what we gave him when he was little to check the weather. Now he just uses his phone. So that's the difference, 7 years can make. And the new painting of him standing outside, checking the weather on his phone. It's kind of funny because he is standing outside. Like I mentioned, we live in Omaha. So he is standing outside after a snowstorm with no coat on. That was not me. That is having a teenager who will not wear a coat. So that has nothing to do with NF. I guess that's called adolescence. So, that is the end of my slideshow. So I will stop sharing my screen here.
Great, and I will join you. Thank you.
Yes.
And I had a chance to meet Henry and Henry's brother, Jack, right?
Fred, close.
Sorry.
Oh no, totally close. One syllable, 4 letters, totally
So
close.
at the inauguration ceremony, both of Rachel's husband and 2 children and other family members were there, and really was a delight to meet both of your sons.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you for sharing that. Why don't we talk a little bit about Kathy's, because that photo means a lot to me. And it's the serendipity of the world that, so I had been working with Creighton on, for several years on various ways of giving back. And we had several discussions about the role of the humanities in being a doctor. And it so happened that Creighton was in the process of redesigning the curriculum and bringing humanities in. And that's how we happened to settle on a gift that I was giving that was endowing this chair in medical humanities. And then in the process of introducing me to the person who was going to be the first chair holder, we have this conversation, and I'm learning about Rachel, and I'm learning about her son with NF, and I'm learning about all the painting she's done, and she's learning about me going through the various Facebook and websites. And we, in our first conversation, learned that we both know Kathy, and that Rachel actually met Kathy independent of my first conversation with her. And maybe you mind to share a little bit about that first meeting you had with Kathy, and then we'll talk about this coming together and how the portrait then came to be.
Oh yeah. Well, I met her as with a lot of different disorders or anything like that. The NF community has these forums each year and kind of patient symposiums and stuff. So I had met Kathy down in Austin at the Children's Tumor Foundation's symposium that year. And what's funny is I didn't actually meet her at the symposium. I met her in the airport because we're both going from Austin back home. And it's kind of interesting too. I only met her because our flight was delayed. I mean, if our flight would have been on time, none of this would have happened. So our flight's totally delayed. And I was sitting there sketching, and then I heard this voice that said, "Hey, you're the artist." And then I recognized her from the symposium, but we hadn't really talked. So I spent the whole time we were stranded in the terminal. So getting to know each other. But so she was actually just asking, like, how do you do the oil portraits? What does somebody with NF have to do to get their oil portrait painted? And there really isn't some big recipe or formula that I use, but I was kidding around with her, and I said, you have to be doing something that, really fascinating. Which is, it's actually kind of a joke. If you look at my paintings, it's like, you're going to see people like baking a cake, you're going to see people like doing everyday stuff. So it was supposed to be a joke. So I didn't expect her to respond. And she's like, oh, oh, I have that. It's like, what? It's like, what do you mean you have that? But she got her phone out and she started scrolling through all these pictures. And you know, and I didn't, like I said, this was before I met Dr. Deming. I didn't know anything about this stuff. So all I'm seeing is pictures of Kathy, you know, hiking and trekking somewhere, you know, that's interesting in these, you know, so I'm definitely thinking we're overseas somewhere, but, and she's like, well, you know, that she had trekked up to the base camp of Mount Everest. And I was like, well, and I was like, well, it counts. And then it was so interesting because I know that I just misunderstood her or something, because she did talk about, you know, and I'm seeing people in these photos and it's like, well, she talked about going with a group, but I didn't know if it was like maybe a church group or something. I wasn't really sure. So I'm asking about these people in the picture and she goes, oh, so she told me then that's when she had cancer. I didn't know that prior. And so everybody has cancer and dealing with it in some capacity. And I said, okay. And she said something about our doctor, but then I said, oh, okay. I said, like, your doctor, you know, thought it'd be good for you guys to like take a trip or something. And she's like, she said something like, well, yeah. And then he went on it too. And it's like, what? And I was like, oh, I have never heard of it. Yeah, that's definitely a first, Dr. Deming. So I have never heard of this. So, so she's, I mean, that she went, well, of course you're recommending, but that she would go with her doctor and go up there. And I was like, what in the world? But you know, after the airport, you know, as we all do, we get busy and stuff. But I sent her a message, like, I don't know, a month or so later, and said, you know, hey, remember me, the lady from the airport? You know, send the photos and all that. And the first set that she sent me were good pictures of her, but you know, she was like looking and smiling at the camera. And I always tell people, like, sometimes what makes like really good photos, not so much for oil paintings, you know. And so I told her, I said, it's better if you're not looking at the camera, but you know, you're doing something and you're engaged in what you're doing. And I said, I really like my NF portraits to have people really active in what they're doing. And so, you know, we can look at the painting and get into it, and we don't have someone staring at us while we do. So so that's kind of why I like that. But she never sent me the photos. And then I sent another message. I mean, this was probably like a year later or something, and she just didn't respond back. And the truth is, at that time, you know, I mean, I just thought, well, I'm not interested or busy or whatever. And that's fine. You know, I mean, that's okay. But then fall of 2019, Children's Tumor Foundation, in conjunction with the University of Iowa, was hosting this kind of family symposium thing again. And usually, of course, that's in Iowa City, but this time they're having it in Des Moines. And I thought I'd really like to have Kathy's portrait done, you know, before this event. That'd be more meaningful. And so I could just bring it that day and I could see Kathy and everybody. And what Dr. Deming, of course, knew, but I didn't know, was, you know, Kathy had passed away. And so it's like, oh, and then it kind of became more clear why she wasn't responding. And, you know, like I said, I took that as she just wasn't interested. And it's like, well, I didn't know that part of the story, which.
Then when Rachel and I first met and started chatting, it was in that first conversation, I said, would you be willing to do Kathy's portrait?
Oh, yeah.
And at that point, I had the honor of sending the photos, going through the many photos of the Above and Beyond Cancer trip that Kathy was on to Everest Base Camp, because it changed her life and meant so much to her. And you already saw this evening the portrait that Rachel did of one of the photographs of Kathy in the Himalayas. And that definitely, she lived her life big. And so for that to all come together, you know, the world works in mysterious ways. But the first time that we talk and Kathy becomes our commonality. Let me ask you a couple of other questions. And I think back on my days of medical school. So most I would say for probably 100 years, medical school education didn't really change in the way it was done. You know, you go to undergrad, you take all your science courses and you take some of the humanity electives and you start medical school. And Rachel, I might not have told you this, but the first day of medical school, so everybody takes the same classes the first year, the traditional way, and you're all in a great big auditorium, and it's the same classroom you're in for every single one of your classes. And the first day, the associate dean gets up and says, well, I don't care whatever you studied before you came in here, and it was probably pretty easy going to college, but from this day forward, it is live bullets. And live bullets. And if you don't do well, you're out. And you then take all of the science courses that you've already taken in undergrad over again. And the idea that you would take humanities in medical school just was unheard of. It's like, you had humanities electives in college. That's what college is for. But the new curriculum, realizes that that being a physician is a human being taking care of a human being. And I would say that my success as a cancer doctor has probably more to do with my understanding of psychology and philosophy and art and literature than if I'd taken 5 more organic chemistry classes. At some point, when you are engaged in conversation with individuals who are dealing with life and death and mortality, humanities really does matter. And I want to get to your role now as a professor in the medical school teaching medical students. I got to spend a day at Creighton and meeting some of the students, and I think back where most people go to medical school are highly motivated to do well and to score well and to get good grades. And my idea, the thought that I would in medical school my first year, like wreck my grade point average by taking a drawing class that I'm not good at, would have been terrifying. So I wasn't proud of this, but I did say to Rachel, so how do you work the grades on somebody who's now in medical school who really wants to do well and they take art?
No, it's not like that. I mean, everybody always thinks that. But keep in mind, like, I'm supposed to be the teacher too. So I'm like, I'm supposed to be teaching you. So, I'm not doing my job either if you're like, turning in the kindergarten looking Thanksgiving turkey drawing or something. So, it's like, so, I mean, I am supposed to do that. And all of that actually with our selectives, all of that is pass fail. Yeah. So that part is, I think a big sigh of relief for all those med schools, because it's not just you, they're the same way.
Yes.
And
right. What's on the test?
They apologize when they come in. They're like, I can't draw, like, what am I going to do? Kick you out or something?
So Rachel is one of a number of humanities professors, and we will benefit here at our cancer education series. We're going to have some of the other professors that are experts in Victorian English literature. One professor who teaches the sort of social determinants of health as seen through the novels of Charles Dickens, and several others. But back to what you do and the role that you play in the education of students. So I understand from my patients, when we ask them to be creative, and that could be to sit down and write a reflection, to share a poem, to do a drawing, to do some photography. There's something that happens when we engage our creativity that takes us to a different level that I think connects us more authentically with some of those real deep meaning, purpose, meaning of life issues. And maybe ask you to reflect on maybe as an artist yourself, when you're tapping into the creative juice.
I think is also time. So this is a great time for them to do it, because we actually have the time to make art. And from your point of view, it's like, well, I don't know how much time you have with a patient, but if you're like, well, I've got 10 minutes, then I got to go to this other room and see these other patients, or, I told them, I said, this to me is such a blessing for them that, like, even when Eileen came, I mean, to be able to do a Zoom with somebody for 2 hours who's going through chemo and have these, sort of organic conversations as we make hair, so we're doing something that's fun, and very creative. And these students, by the way, would tell you that they're not creative at all. And yet, if you saw all the hair that they made, but what was interesting is it gave us a time and a space to have sort of meaningful conversations that just happened, and same with, so really, even like when we had Cody come and we drew him with, it's like we have a couple hours, so for me, it's a time thing. It's like, you can't really, well, I shouldn't say you can't, people argue with it, but you can't be like, go be creative right now. You got 10 minutes to be creative. It's like, hurry up and make a painting. I mean, it's like, it doesn't work that way. So, I just feel like having this time to like let things germinate and have discovery and think of things in ways that you hadn't previously considered. And it's a time for sharing. So it's like when we're making art, everyone's looking at what each other has created, and you get an idea from that person, and that person got an idea from how you came up with it. And in fact, even with some of that, I do different exercises of like, how much do we influence each other with our artwork? And then how much do we not? So sometimes I do the same exercise with different paintings. But if I can tell that you can see the person next to you, I'll like do these little groupings, and then like all three of them will have like the similar drawing. And then these three will have a similar drawing. And then I asked him, and I don't know, I'm not a physician, but I said, I think collaboration's good. I said, but you always have to be mindful too, that it's like, well, look how you guys are all now suddenly thinking the same thing. And it's like, are you taking away that sort of independent thought that you would have had? You know what I mean? And I don't know if that would happen, but I'm like wondering if, if you have a patient and it's like, well, what if I opened up the chart? I just read what these other 3 doctors thought of it. Well, maybe I would just assume, well, that's what it is. It's like, so I've got to still be able to look at somebody and come up with my own conclusions that might be different from my, I don't know. I'm not a physician, but
yeah, no, that's a good point. And just to relate that to medicine, sometimes patients want, can't all 3 of you doctors, can't you all be together in one room at one time and I talk to you? And I say, well, that may not get you what you want, because human nature being what it is, the loudest and most certain the physicians will start talking and the other 2 won't disagree, and you won't get an independent, you won't get this great creative thinking in front of the patient with 3 doctors sort of admitting that they don't know certain things and trying to creatively solve something. So I described about all 3 painting the same thing.
Yeah.
I think it happens a lot when somebody just runs with it and you don't get everyone's honest input.
Oh yeah. Well, I guess it's the same in art. So if that happens there, it definitely happens. But at the same time, it's like, well, obviously, as collaboration is good, and it's nothing like that. But yeah, a lot of the experiences, and if I'm going to be completely transparent, I was nervous the first time I taught med students, because I thought, oh gosh, I'm like, are these students going to be like, why are you wasting my time? I should go be studying for something important. I should be going and more, you know what I mean? Like, I should be studying. I should be doing all this. So I was very nervous. But it was the opposite. Like, they came in, they're like, what's a drawing horse? And it's like, what? And so, so I had them sitting on drawing horses, and it's like, oh my gosh, what a joy.
By the way, for those who don't know, I didn't know what a drawing horse was. But artists often, so you straddle a bench. So you've got the table in front of you and you're straddling a bench, and that's an art horse. Drawing horse.
Drawing mules, drawing horses.
One thing I was thinking about that as you pointed out, your role is not to make artists out of medical students. And even the title of the class, it's like using art as a way of increasing empathy And I'm a big fan of also the word compassion. I mean, there's this story that the Dalai Lama talks about the difference between empathy and compassion, and that if he comes across someone in the middle of the trail in the mountains with a great big rock on them, holding them down, empathy is getting down on the trail and feeling what the person is feeling. Compassion is moving the rock off the patient. So I think that the idea that art can help bring out empathy and compassion, that's a more tangible objective that what you're trying to teach medical students, not to necessarily be artists. And I think all of the humanities play into that. Can you maybe an example of how you saw some empathy or compassion coming out of some of your classes with maybe the models? Maybe it was the young man with Fragile X, or it was some of the others. How you saw from these medical just empathy or compassion flow.
Well, some of it again is when I ask them to model. That's a big one. So, that doesn't seem like a big deal at first until it's like, oh my gosh, until you get on the model stand. And then it's like, now you have to be, stand still for like 5 minutes and we're all going to stare at you. And it's like, well, now, I mean, of course, everyone's like, oh my gosh, why did I wear this shirt today? Or like, why am I, just all the things that go through your mind. Or it's like, oh, is somebody going to notice, like, I have a mole on my arm, or are they going to notice? I mean, all these things that you start thinking about. And it's like, well, and I told him, I said, well, what do you think your patients are thinking, when they come in and, and now they're just wearing the little robe and you're, you're a physician and you're carefully examining. And, I said, they feel vulnerable. And I said, now you guys, that's definitely an exercise where they said that they definitely have more empathy to the patients, just with that scrutiny of the, staring and analyzing. And it's like, and we're just drawing. I mean, it's not like I make them get into little gowns and go up there. So I'm not doing anything like that. But I mean, just this thought, I did another exercise too, where I thought, I don't want them to actually be in like real pain or anything. But just uncomfortable. So I made them take these poses that are just a little uncomfortable for like 5 minutes. Okay, so maybe you're just kind of got a lot of weight on one leg, which it's just a little too long. And so I had them reflect on that. I said, in the beginning of the pose, you're worried that someone's looking at you or whatever, but by the end of the pose, it's like your leg, like is like quaking. It really hurts. And I said, so did you notice that all you thought about was the pain in your leg? You didn't care anymore, like that people were staring at you or looking or, and I said, it makes me wonder if you'll have patients, who have reoccurring pain or something where it's just, that's all they can focus on. So they can't focus on all this other stuff. I said, similar to you just taking this pose or whatever, it's like, maybe that's almost like their life now is this pain in their arm or whatever it is. I said, and we're just being slightly uncomfortable for 5 minutes at a time. I said, but can you imagine if your life was like that, where you just had this kind of constant pain or, so we talk about that and they reflect about that. But yeah, but that one was definitely one. And same with actually, they really appreciated Cody and his mom coming, and I mean, I can't say that I knew much about Fragile X prior to her visit either. So I, of course, learned a lot, but yeah. And then actually that one was interesting in the fact of the role of caregiver, that you have patients, but I'm not sure, a lot of them had thought about just even the caregiver. And I mean, I don't know how you define a caregiver. Everybody's a caregiver, the doctor, the loved ones, the person who brought up your food in the hospital. I mean, everybody's a caregiver, but just these, these roles and stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of the reflections was, I mean, it was about Cody and Fragile X, but it was also about his mother and just wondering about the life she might have in this, in this sort of role that was, kind of unexpectedly, put on her and the life they lead with that. So, I mean, it sounds interesting, but empathy for not just your patient, but the people coming in with your patient.
Yes. We have a live studio audience and we have a virtual audience. So I'm going to open it up to questions and we'll let the live studio audience get the first shot. So if you any questions from the room here.
I have a question. I'm an artist for the last maybe 7 or 8 years, mostly visual arts, pastel. And it seems like I'm also a cancer survivor. And it seems like through some of the more difficult times of my life, and my life is not a short life, it seems like where I find meaning often, deep meaning, soulful living, so to speak, to surpass some of these, surpass isn't the right word, to navigate some of these challenges that life gives to everyone. No one gets through it without it. It seems like the humanities, art, poetry, the written word and the classics, it just seems like that's what kind of gets me through.
It helps you.
Yeah, and it would seem like the translation there, which is what you're doing, is from what I can hear, is that the physicians and what Dr. Deming with the new center is, going to be offering the community. It just seems like the blending of the two is just an ability to put human life on a higher plane.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said. Yeah. Well, I think it is a way to process. I mean, when you think about it, my whole NF portrait project was a way for me to make sense of all of this. So I mean, I was using art to try and figure out how I'm supposed to deal with a incurable and progressive genetic disorder with my son. I'm not a research scientist. I'm certainly not going to jump in and help in that capacity. And I don't know what so I mean, yeah, I mean, I can completely understand why you would go to your pastels and sort of just move through it and use that. Yeah.
Great.
Kindred spirits.
Other questions from folks here? And Chris, do we have any, our virtual community has to type in questions.
They're welcome to type in their question with the Q&A down at the bottom of their screen or the chat. We can relay those. But so far, none.
Well, Rachel, this has been great. We're getting to the end of the hour. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate, first of all, your role at Creighton and what you're doing with the education of medical students. I'm just look forward to seeing how the medical students that are on this curriculum, how they advance through their medical education and how it changes the way that they are doctors. So we're looking forward to that. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chris, and Chris is going to close us out for the evening.
All right.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Rachel, thank you. That was fascinating to me and to our audience, I'm sure. This was recorded this evening and will be part of our Above and Beyond Cancer YouTube channel, and will also be on the Mercy One Cancer Center website. If you get on the Cancer Center website, you just type in Cancer Education Series and all of our recordings for the last year or so will pop up. So I did a little research this week and nearly 2,000 people have watched these videos. So we're excited that we can provide this educational service across the country and maybe even around the world. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I look forward to seeing more of your paintings in the future.